The scorching summer heat of 1873 shimmered across the dusty plains outside Seattle, Washington, as Hope Sutherland's scream pierced the afternoon stillness. She hadn't seen the rattlesnake coiled beside the weathered fence post until it was too late, its fangs sinking deep into her ankle with lightning precision. Hope had only been in Washington territory for 3 weeks, having traveled from Boston to establish a new life as Seattle's newest schoolteacher. At 22, she'd wanted adventure beyond the confines of her structured Eastern upbringing. But as she collapsed onto the dry grass of her modest homestead's yard, clutching her leg in agony, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. "Help!" she cried out, though her nearest neighbor was half a mile away. Her small cabin sat at the edge of town, bordered by wild grasslands that stretched toward the distant mountains. The snake, disturbed by her sudden movement, had already slithered away into the tall grass, leaving Hope alone with the burning pain that radiated from her ankle up her calf. Xavier Turner had been tracking a stray calf when he heard the cry. At 26, he was already foreman at the Broken Spur, the largest cattle operation in the territory. Standing 6 feet tall with shoulders broadened by years of hard work, Xavier was known throughout the region as a man who could break the wildest horses and face down the toughest outlaws. But something in that feminine cry sent him racing across the field with his heart in his throat. When he spotted the young woman sprawled on the ground, her honey blonde hair falling loose from its pins and her face contorted in pain, Xavier immediately recognized the telltale puncture marks on her exposed ankle. The area around the bite was already swelling, an angry red spreading beneath her fair skin. "Madam, try not to move," he said, swinging down from his horse and rushing to her side. "I can see you've been bit." Hope looked up at him, her green eyes clouded with pain and fear. "Rattlesnake," she managed through clenched teeth. "It happened just now." Xavier nodded grimly, quickly assessing the situation. "I'm going to have to work fast. The venom's already spreading." Without hesitation, he pulled a sharp hunting knife from the leather sheath at his belt. Hope's eyes widened in terror. "What are you going to do?" "Save your life if you'll let me." His voice was steady, his blue eyes holding her gaze. "I need to cut the wound and draw out the poison. It'll hurt something fierce, but it's your only chance." Hope stared at the gleaming blade, then back at this stranger's face tanned from the sun, jaw set with determination, yet his eyes held a gentleness that somehow steadied her racing heart. "Do it," she whispered, bracing herself. Xavier worked swiftly, tearing a strip from his own shirt and wrapping it just above her ankle as a tourniquet. Then, with practiced precision, he made a clean X-shaped cut across the fang marks. Hope bit back a scream, tears streaming down her face as he leaned down and began to suck the venom from the wound, spitting it onto the ground beside them. The pain was excruciating, but through the haze of it, she felt oddly safe under this cowboy's care. After several long minutes, Xavier sat back, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "I think I got most of it out," he said, his voice hoarse. "But you're going to need a doctor, and quick. That poison's still in your system." Hope tried to nod, but a wave of dizziness swept over her. "I can't. I feel so strange." "You're going to be all right," Xavier promised, though worry creased his brow. In one fluid motion, he gathered her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing against his chest as he carried her to his horse. "I'm taking you to Doc Wilson in town." "My name is Hope," she whispered as he carefully positioned her in front of him on the saddle. "Hope Sutherland." "Xavier Turner," he replied, one strong arm securing her against him while the other took the reins. "Hold on tight, Miss Sutherland. We've got a hard ride ahead." The journey into Seattle was a blur for Hope. The jostling of the horse sent waves of pain through her leg, and the venom was making her light-headed. She was vaguely aware of Xavier's solid presence behind her, his arm tight around her waist, his voice occasionally murmuring reassurances in her ear. As they thundered into town, people turned to stare at the sight of Xavier Turner carrying the new schoolteacher, her leg bleeding and her face deathly pale. He rode straight to Doc Wilson's small office, shouting for help before they'd even come to a complete stop. The doctor, a graying man with kind eyes and capable hands, took one look at Hope and immediately cleared his examination table. Rattlesnake, Xavier explained tersely as he gently laid Hope down. Bit her maybe 30 minutes ago. I cut it and sucked out what I could. Doc Wilson nodded approvingly. You did right, Turner, might have saved her life. He turned to his assistant. Get me my snake kit and boil some water. The next few hours passed in a haze for Hope. The doctor cleaned the wound thoroughly, applied poultices of herbs, and gave her medicine that made her sleep. Through it all, she was dimly aware of Xavier's presence sometimes by her side, sometimes pacing near the window but never leaving. When she finally awoke fully, the light coming through the office window told her it was early evening. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain shot through her leg. Easy there, came Xavier's deep voice. He moved from the chair in the corner to her bedside. Doc says you need to stay still. Hope blinked, surprised to find him still there. You stayed. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Couldn't very well leave without knowing if you were going to pull through. Will I? She asked, suddenly afraid again. Doc says you're going to be just fine. You're lucky the snake must have been young or already spent some venom elsewhere, and the cut I made helped get a lot of it out. He paused, then added, You're mighty brave, Miss Sutherland. Hope gave a weak laugh. Not brave, just terrified and without options. She studied him properly. For the first time his dark hair was slightly too long, curling at the collar of his blue shirt. His face was handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw and eyes that reminded her of the summer sky. Thank you for saving my life, Mr. Turner. Xavier, he corrected. And anyone would have done the same. But it wasn't anyone, she said softly. It was you. Something passed between them, then a moment of connection neither could quite explain. It was broken by Doc Wilson's entrance. Well, now our patient's awake, the doctor said cheerfully. You're a fortunate young woman, Miss Sutherland. Another hour without treatment and we might be having a different conversation. How soon can I return home? Hope asked, thinking of her little cabin and her responsibilities. School was set to start in just 2 weeks. The doctor frowned. Not for several days at least. That leg needs rest and I need to watch for infection. But I have no place to stay in town, Hope protested. And I can't afford. Mrs. Miller at the boarding house has a room ready for you, Xavier interrupted. No charge until you're back on your feet. Hope stared at him in surprise. How did you arrange that? Xavier shifted, looking almost embarrassed. Folks around here take care of their own, and seeing as you're our new schoolteacher, you're definitely one of our own now. I'll have someone bring some of your things from your cabin, Doc Wilson added. Turner here already gave me your key. Hope felt tears welling in her eyes. She'd come west seeking independence, determined to make her own way without help from anyone. Yet here she was, completely dependent on the kindness of strangers. I don't know what to say. Just focus on getting better, Xavier said. Seattle needs its schoolteacher. Over the next few days, Hope discovered that Xavier Turner was a man of his word. Though his duties at the Broken Spur kept him busy, he visited her every evening at the boarding house, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book he thought she might enjoy, fresh wildflowers, or Mrs. Henderson's famous apple tarts from the bakery. They talked for hours, discovering shared interests despite their different backgrounds. Hope told him about growing up in Boston, her passion for teaching, and her dream of making a difference in the lives of frontier children. Xavier shared stories of cattle drives, the changing landscape of the territory, and his hopes of one day having his own ranch. Why did you really come west? He asked her one evening, a week after the snake bite. They sat on the boarding house porch, Hope's injured leg propped on a small stool. Hope considered the question carefully. Everyone expects a tragic story, perhaps a broken engagement or family scandal, but the truth is far simpler. I wanted a life that I chose, not one chosen for me. Xavier nodded, understanding in his eyes. Freedom? Yes, she agreed. Though I admit, When I was lying there with that snake's venom burning through my veins, I questioned the wisdom of my choice. And now, his question was quiet, his gaze intent on her face. Hope looked out at the sunset painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks over the distant mountains. Now I think perhaps I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. By the time Hope was well enough to return to her cabin, school was just days from starting. Xavier insisted on escorting her home, checking every inch of her small property for any sign of snakes before pronouncing it safe. "I've brought you something," he said as they stood on her porch. From his saddlebag, he produced a pair of high leather boots. "These should protect your ankles when you're walking through the grass. They're not fancy like ladies' shoes back east, but they're practical." Hope took the boots, touched beyond words. "They're perfect," she said, her voice catching slightly. "You've been so kind to me, Xavier. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "Maybe you could start by having dinner with me on Saturday," he suggested, a hint of nervousness in his usually confident demeanor. "That is, if you're not opposed to being seen with a simple cowboy." Hope smiled up at him. "I'd be honored to have dinner with the man who saved my life, whether he's a cowboy or not." That first dinner led to many more. Throughout the fall of 1873, as Hope established herself as Seattle's beloved schoolteacher, Xavier became a constant in her life. He helped repair her cabin's leaky roof before the rainy season, taught her to ride properly so she could visit her more distant students, and became a favorite with the schoolchildren, who begged for his stories of cattle drives and wild horses whenever he visited. As winter approached, Hope realized with some surprise that she had fallen deeply in love with Xavier Turner. His strength and kindness had captured her heart completely, yet she hesitated to express her feelings. Despite their growing closeness, Xavier maintained a certain reserve that made her wonder if he saw her as anything more than a friend he had once rescued. One crisp November evening, Hope was grading papers by lamplight when a knock came at her door. She opened it to find Xavier standing there, snowflakes dusting his shoulders and hat. "Xavier, I wasn't expecting you tonight." She ushered him in, noticing immediately that something was different about him. He seemed tense, almost nervous. "I needed to talk to you," he said, removing his hat but remaining standing. "I've been offered a job." "A job?" Hope repeated, her heart suddenly beating faster. "What kind of job?" "Trail boss for a drive to Wyoming. Good money. I'd be gone 3 months, maybe 4. His eyes searched her face. "I told Mr. Brannigan I'd give him my answer tomorrow." Hope tried to hide her dismay. 4 months without seeing Xavier seemed an eternity. "It sounds like a wonderful opportunity," she managed to say. "That's the thing," he said, taking a step closer. "I don't want to go. Why not?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. Xavier's gaze held her steadily. "Because every day I'd be away from you would be a day wasted." Hope Sutherland. "I've faced down stampeding cattle and gun-toting outlaws without blinking an eye, but the thought of not seeing your smile for months on end, that scares me more than any rattlesnake." Hope's breath caught. "What are you saying, Xavier?" In answer, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box, intricately carved with wildflowers. "I'm saying that snake bite was the luckiest thing that ever happened to me, because it led me to you. I'm saying I love you, Hope, and if you'll have me, I want to spend every day of my life with you." Tears filled Hope's eyes as Xavier knelt before her and opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring with a small pearl. "Hope Sutherland, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" For a moment, Hope couldn't speak. Then, with joy overwhelming her, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Xavier Turner, I will marry you." Their wedding took place on Christmas Eve in Seattle's small church, decorated with pine boughs and candles. The entire community turned out to celebrate, from Hope's students and their families to Xavier's cowhands from the Broken Spur. Doc Wilson proudly escorted Hope down the aisle, having assumed a fatherly role in her life since the snakebite incident. As they exchanged vows, Hope couldn't help but marvel at how her life had changed in just 5 months. What had begun as a potentially fatal encounter with a rattlesnake had led to the greatest happiness she'd ever known. That winter, they moved into Hope's cabin, which Xavier expanded with an additional bedroom and a larger kitchen. Hope continued teaching, becoming known throughout the territory for her progressive methods and unwavering dedication to her students. Xavier took on a partnership at the Broken Spur, his natural leadership and fair dealing earning him respect throughout the region. Spring brought new adventures as Hope, and Xavier started a small breeding program for horses on their property. Xavier had an eye for good horseflesh, and Hope discovered she had a talent for gentling even the most skittish colts. They respond to patience and kindness, she explained to an impressed Xavier after successfully gaining the trust of a particularly wild-eyed filly. Not so different from children, really. Or stubborn cowboys, Xavier added with a grin, pulling her close for a kiss. Their happiness seemed complete, yet as their first anniversary approached, Hope began to feel the absence of something they both longed for. Despite their hopes, she had not yet conceived a child. She worried sometimes, watching Xavier with the town's children, that she might never be able to give him a family. "It will happen when it's meant to," Xavier assured her one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "And if it doesn't, we'll find other ways to fill our home with love." Hope leaned against his shoulder, grateful for his understanding. "I just want to give you everything, Xavier. You've given me so much." "You already have given me everything," he said simply. "Every day with you is a gift I never expected to have." The summer of 1874 brought both challenges and joys. A drought threatened crops throughout the region, and tensions rose between settlers and the remaining Native American tribes who were increasingly being pushed from their traditional lands. Hope used her position as teacher to promote understanding, inviting tribal elders to speak to her students about their culture and history. "It's not a popular stance," the town mayor warned her after one such lesson. "Some folks don't appreciate being reminded that others were here first." "Those same folks send their children to me to be educated," Hope replied firmly. "And part of education is learning to see the world through eyes other than your own." Xavier supported her completely, even when his business interests suffered from some townspeople's disapproval. "You stand by what's right," he told her. "That's one of the reasons I fell in love with you." Their second autumn together brought the news they'd been waiting for. Hope was expecting a child in the spring. Xavier's joy knew no bounds. He spent every spare moment adding a nursery to their growing home and carving a beautiful wooden cradle that became the envy of every expectant mother in Seattle. The pregnancy was not an easy one. Hope suffered terrible sickness in the early months, forcing her to take a leave from teaching. Later, as winter set in, she developed worrying swelling in her hands and feet that concerned Doc Wilson. "Bed rest," he prescribed sternly after examining her in her 7th month. "Complete bed rest until that baby arrives," Hope protested, but Xavier was adamant. "I nearly lost you once to a snake," he reminded her. "I won't risk losing you or our child now." The enforced rest was difficult for Hope's active nature, but Xavier made it bearable. He read to her for hours, brought her reports from her replacement at the school, and even arranged for her students to visit in small groups, filling their cabin with the laughter and energy she missed. It was during one such visit in early April that Hope felt the first pains. She managed to maintain her composure until the children left, then turned to Xavier with wide eyes. "It's time," she whispered. The labor was long and difficult. For 18 hours, Hope fought to bring their child into the world, with Xavier refusing to leave her side despite Doc Wilson's suggestions that he wait elsewhere. "I stayed with her through the snake venom," Xavier said grimly. "I'll stay with her through this." When their son finally arrived with a lusty cry just as dawn broke on April 7, 1875, both parents wept with joy and relief. They named him Samuel Wilson Turner, honoring the doctor who had helped save both mother and child at different times. "He has your eyes," Hope murmured tiredly as she cradled their newborn son. The baby's bright blue gaze seemed to take in everything, even in his first hours of life. "And your determination," Xavier added with a smile, noting how strongly the tiny fingers gripped his own. Poor Rattlesnake wouldn't have stood a chance against him. As Samuel grew, so did their family's prosperity. Xavier's horse breeding business flourished, with buyers coming from as far as California to purchase his stock. Hope returned to teaching part-time, bringing Samuel with her until he was old enough to stay with the capable Mrs. Miller during school hours. Their third year of marriage brought another pregnancy, this one much easier than the first. In February 1877, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth Hope Turner, with her mother's honey blonde hair and her father's steady temperament. "Our family feels complete now," Hope said as they watched their children play in the yard of what had become a substantial homestead. The original cabin was now just one part of a comfortable home that housed not only their family, but often visitors from town and travelers passing through. Xavier nodded, his arm around her shoulders. "Though I wouldn't object if another little Turner decided to join us somewhere down the line." Hope laughed, leaning into his embrace. "Nor would I, but for now I'm simply grateful for what we have." What they had built together was impressive by any standard. Beyond their home and family, they had become pillars of the Seattle community. Xavier served on the town council, advocating for fair treatment of all settlers regardless of origin. Hope had established a scholarship fund for promising students who wished to continue their education beyond what the local school could provide. Their reputation spread throughout Washington Territory. When tragedy struck neighboring communities, whether fire, flood, or illness, the Turners were often first to organize aid. When a particularly harsh winter in 1879 left many families struggling, Hope and Xavier opened their home to 3 orphan children until permanent arrangements could be made. "You should have been a mother to dozens," Xavier teased as he watched Hope patiently teaching the youngest orphan, a 4-year-old girl, to write her name. "I am a mother to dozens," Hope replied with a smile. "Every child who passes through my classroom is partly mine, at least for a time." The years passed with the usual mixture of joy and sorrow that marks any life fully lived. They mourned when Doc Wilson passed away in 1880, leaving a legacy of care that had touched nearly every family in the region. They celebrated as Seattle grew from frontier town to thriving city, bringing new opportunities and challenges. Through it all, the foundation of their life together remained unshakable. The love that had begun in those desperate moments after a snake bite only deepened with time and shared experience. In the summer of 1883, a decade after they first met, Hope and Xavier returned to the spot where the rattlesnake had struck. The area had changed. Their property now included this land, and what had been wild grass was now a well-tended pasture where their finest horses grazed. "It seems almost unreal now," Hope said, looking down at her ankle where a faint scar still remained. "To think that if you hadn't been tracking that stray calf that day." "I would have found you anyway," Xavier said with certainty. "Maybe not that day, but somehow, I believe that completely." Hope smiled, taking his hand. "Is that so, Mr. Turner, and what makes you so sure?" "Because some things are just meant to be," he replied, pulling her into his arms. "Like us." As they stood there together, their children's laughter carrying from the house in the distance, Hope reflected on the strange and wonderful journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come west, seeking independence and adventure, never imagining that her greatest adventure would begin with a snake bite, and a cowboy brave enough to cut the wound and draw out the poison. "I love you, Xavier Turner," she said, looking up at the man who had been her rescuer, her friend, her husband, and the father of her children. "Thank you for saving my life that day." Xavier's eyes, still as blue and clear as when they'd first met, crinkled at the corners as he smiled down at her. "And I love you, Hope Turner. Thank you for giving my life meaning every day since." Their kiss was as tender and passionate as their first had been a decade earlier. As the setting sun painted the western sky in brilliant colors, they walked hand in hand back to the home they had built together, a home founded on courage, compassion, and a love that had begun in the most unexpected of circumstances. The years continued to unfold with new challenges and triumphs. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's skill with horses and his mother's love of books. By his 16th birthday in 1891, he was already managing significant portions of the family's now extensive breeding operation, showing a keen business mind that impressed everyone who dealt with him. Elizabeth, 3 years younger, displayed a remarkable talent for medicine, spending hours with the town's new doctor learning about healing herbs and proper care for the sick. "She has the touch, doctor," Reynolds remarked to Hope after watching Elizabeth gently clean and bandage a ranch hand's badly cut arm. "A natural healer's instinct." In 1893, when Hope was 42 and Xavier 46, they were surprised by an unexpected blessing: the arrival of their third child, a boy they named James Xavier Turner. Though the pregnancy had been concerning due to Hope's age, the delivery was remarkably easy compared to her earlier experiences. "He was just waiting for the right time to join our family," Xavier said as he cradled his newborn son, marveling at the perfect tiny features. The same year brought another significant change when Hope was asked to become the superintendent of schools for the entire county. The position would mean less teaching but greater influence over educational policies and standards throughout the region. "You should accept," Xavier urged her when she hesitated. "No one has fought harder for quality education for all children. But it would mean more time away from home just when we have little James to consider," Hope worried. Xavier smiled. "Our older children are hardly children anymore. Samuel is practically running the horse business already, and Elizabeth has announced her intention to train as a proper doctor. As for James," he looked down at their infant son, sleeping peacefully in his cradle, "I think your husband can manage to care for one baby with some help from Mrs. Miller when needed." Hope's tenure as superintendent brought positive changes throughout the county's schools. She established libraries in even the most remote schoolhouses, insisted on equal education for girls and boys, and created a training program for teachers that became a model for the entire state. Xavier, meanwhile, expanded their horse breeding business into one of the most respected in the western states. Their specialty became horses particularly suited to the changing needs of the modern West, strong enough for ranch work, but gentle enough for families settling in the growing towns and cities. As Seattle entered the final years of the 19th century, the frontier town where Hope and Xavier had met was transforming into a modern city. Streets that had once been mud were now paved, electric lights replaced gas lamps, telephones connected businesses across town. "Sometimes I hardly recognize the place," Xavier remarked one evening as they returned from a concert at the city's new opera house. "Do you ever miss the simplicity of those early years?" Hope considered the question as their carriage rolled past buildings that hadn't existed when she'd first arrived. "I miss certain aspects: the close-knit community where everyone knew everyone else, the direct connection to the land. But I don't miss the hardships or the isolation." "Nor the rattlesnakes," Xavier teased. Hope smiled, taking his hand. "Well, one particular rattlesnake encounter I wouldn't change for anything." In 1898, their family faced a difficult test when 23-year-old Samuel announced his intention to join the volunteer cavalry for the Spanish-American War. "I need to do this," he told his concerned parents. "Not for adventure or glory, but because I believe it's right." Though terrified for their son's safety, both Hope and Xavier recognized the principled young man they had raised. "Your father taught you to stand by what's right," Hope said, embracing him. "We cannot ask less of you now." The months of Samuel's absence were some of the longest of their lives. Each newspaper account of battles and casualties brought fresh anxiety. Xavier threw himself into work, expanding their operations further. Hope channeled her worry into establishing a support network for other local families with sons in the conflict. When Samuel finally returned home in early 1899, thinner and more serious but physically unharmed, the family's joy was boundless. The experience had matured him in ways that would shape his future path. Within a year, he announced his engagement to Catherine Reynolds, the doctor's daughter who had corresponded faithfully with him throughout his service. "She kept me sane with her letters," Samuel explained. "Her descriptions of home, her thoughtful questions about what I was experiencing, they gave me something to hold onto in the darkest moments." Their wedding in the spring of 1900 was a community celebration that seemed to mark the transition from one century to another. The ceremony incorporated traditions from both the passing frontier era and the emerging modern age. "Your lives together will span 2 centuries," the minister told the young couple. "May you carry forward the best of both the strength and determination of the pioneering spirit, and the promise of progress and understanding that the new century offers." As Hope and Xavier watched their eldest son pledge his life to the woman he loved, they exchanged a look of profound understanding. 27 years had passed since their own lives had intersected because of a venomous snake. The journey from that moment to this one had been filled with more joy, adventure, and love than either could have imagined possible. Elizabeth's path led her to medical school in San Francisco in 1901, fulfilling her dream to become a doctor. "I want to help women especially," she told her parents. "Too many suffer in silence because they're uncomfortable discussing their health with male physicians." Young James, now 8, was showing signs of becoming a talented writer, filling journals with stories inspired by his parents' and older siblings' experiences. "I'm writing about how you saved Mother from the rattlesnake," he informed Xavier one evening. "But I'm making the snake 10 feet long for excitement." Xavier laughed. "The actual event was exciting enough, believe me." As the 20th century established itself, bringing automobiles, airplanes, and other modern wonders, Hope and Xavier entered their 50s with the same adventurous spirit that had defined their younger years. They traveled to visit Elizabeth in California, marveled at the technological displays at the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis, and welcomed their first grandchildren, Samuel and Catherine's twins, Robert and William, born in 1903. "Grandmother," Hope mused, holding tiny Robert while Xavier cradled William. "It seems impossible that we're old enough for such a title." "Speak for yourself," Xavier replied with a wink. "I'm aging like fine whiskey, getting better with each passing year." In 1908, they celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary with a gathering that brought together family, friends, and community members whose lives they had touched. Samuel and Catherine had added a daughter, Mary, to their family. Elizabeth had returned from San Francisco to establish her medical practice in Seattle, specializing in women's and children's health. James, now 15, was preparing to attend university, his talent for writing having earned him a scholarship. During the celebration, the mayor of Seattle presented them with a proclamation honoring their contributions to the community. "Few couples have shaped our city as profoundly as Hope and Xavier Turner," he announced. From education to business, from charitable works to civic leadership, they exemplify the very best of what this community stands for. Later that evening, as their guests departed and the house grew quiet, Hope and Xavier slipped away from the remaining family members to walk together in the garden. The summer night was warm, stars filling the clear sky above them. 35 years, Xavier mused, his arm around Hope's waist as they walked. "If someone had told me the day I found you with that snake bite that we would build all this together, I might not have believed it. And if someone had told me that the cowboy cutting my ankle would become the love of my life, I definitely wouldn't have believed it," Hope replied with a smile. "I was too busy worrying you were going to kill me with that knife." Xavier laughed softly. "You trusted me anyway." I did, Hope acknowledged. Something in your eyes told me I could. She stopped walking and turned to face him. I've never regretted that trust, not for a single moment. Xavier touched her cheek gently. Her honey blonde hair had long since turned to silver, and fine lines marked the passage of time around her eyes and mouth. To him, she was more beautiful than ever. Every morning when I wake up beside you, I'm grateful for that rattlesnake, he said softly. Not that I'd wish the pain on you again, but without it. I know, Hope replied, reaching up to touch his face in return. His own dark hair was now steel gray, the weathered lines of his face telling the story of a life lived outdoors and fully. Some might call it mere chance that you happened to be tracking that stray calf in just the right place at just the right time. But we know better, Xavier finished for her. Some things are simply meant to be. As they sealed this shared understanding with a kiss beneath the stars, both reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From a desperate first encounter marked by pain and fear, they had forged a bond that had not only endured but strengthened through decades of challenges and joys. Their story, which began with a rattlesnake bite and a cowboy brave enough to cut the wound, had expanded to touch countless lives across the changing landscape of the American West. And as they walked back toward their home, where children, grandchildren, and dear friends awaited, both knew with absolute certainty that the greatest adventure of their lives had been the one they shared together.